Palm Springs. Palm Springs is a sci-fi romantic comedy that follows two strangers that meet at a wedding. What makes it sci-fi? Don't worry about it. Don't watch a trailer or read a synopsis, just know that there's more going on than Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti hitting it off. If it wasn't for the twist in this movie, it would be a fairly typical rom-com, but there's nothing wrong with that. Who isn't a sucker for a good rom-com now and again? But it's the science fiction elements that make this a truly great one. The Banshees of Inisherin. The Banshees of Inisherin is a dark comedy drama about lifelong friends, no longer being friends, set in 1920s Ireland. It shouldn't be shocking to hear that a movie ultimately about loneliness can be incredibly heartbreaking, but somehow, this movie manages to be just as funny. This film tackles something that everyone's experienced at some point in their life, and that's likely, at least in part, why this movie resonated with me. A small warning that I was given before seeing the film that I feel like I should pass along: the Irish accent is a bit thick, so unless you've got an ear for it, I'd recommend watching the movie with subtitles. The Bad Guys. The Bad Guys is a comedy heist movie starring a ragtag group of anthropomorphic animals. While the plot of the movie is a little on the predictable side, it's not really a bad thing, most heist movies are. What sets this movie apart is that it's exploding with charm and visual appeal. This movie is fantastically animated, and the lighting and rendering of the movie are doing just as much heavy lifting. It's a movie that knows exactly what it wants to do and look as slick as possible doing it. I recommend this movie to anyone, of course, but for animation fans in particular, this is a must-watch. Pompo the Cinephile. Pompo the Cinephile is a fun and heartfelt look into movie making, both as a business and a creative vessel for the people who make them. This movie functions as not just a functional look at the creation process, but a love letter to cinema itself. I found every character in this movie memorable, and it's impossible not to be drawn in by Pompo. It's a movie about following your dreams and all of the dedication and struggles that come with it, especially if your dream is to make a movie. The Batman. The Batman gives us our most grounded look at superheroes to date, with a grime-filled noir detective story. Even though Pattinson is plenty capable in this film, he doesn't feel like the unstoppable force that Batman feels like in other movies. Instead, we're given a more novice Batman, who still has his flaws, but could one day grow into that unstoppable force that we know and love. Something I find most Batman actors struggle with is being a great Batman or being a great Bruce. Robert Pattinson is no different. While I loved what he put into the cowl, I found his Bruce not very interesting, but I guess it works for the movie, so it's not a huge issue. Paul Dano gives us a completely original take on the Riddler, with the signature flashy green suits replaced with muted colors and whatever this is. While not exactly a popcorn flick, this movie easily stands up with the greats of the hero genre. X. X is undoubtedly one of my favorite slasher movies in recent years. A clear homage to the great classics of the genre, but the movie manages to have more than enough of its own style to stand out from the crowd. The brutal deaths are balanced perfectly with surprisingly tender moments and scenes where you're just kind of laughing at everything. I mean, it might be a horror movie, but it still knows how to have fun. It doesn't take long into the movie for you to have a pretty good idea the direction this movie is going to take, but despite the trope-filled setting, writer-director Ty West plays with your expectations just enough to ensure you're in for a mostly fresh experience. The Menu. The Menu is a black comedy horror movie that even when gripped with suspense, still manages to make you laugh. This movie is filled with biting satire that they make incredibly obvious to be sure everyone gets the picture.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
Obviously, the three leads each do a fantastic job, but it's Hong Chow who plays the maitre d' who is often stealing the spotlight. Unlike most plates at a fancy restaurant, the menu leaves you with more than enough to eat. Before we get to the top, here are a couple of honorable mentions. The Clovehitch Killer, Do Revenge, Violent Night, Black Phone, Barbarian, Nope, Pearl. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Everything Everywhere All at Once is a comedy drama filled with elements of science fiction that spends a sizable portion of its runtime dealing with things like generational trauma, existentialism, and my personal favorite, nihilism. This is far from the first multiverse movie. It's not even the first one to be mainstream. Something I think this movie does better than the rest is explaining these really heady ideas in such a way that even someone with relatively no background in science fiction can wrap their head around, which has undoubtedly helped lead to the movie's success. This movie manages to be incredibly imaginative throughout, while somehow still managing to be perfectly grounded, locking you into what is a very relatable story, if you ignore the different dimension stuff. The movie has a ton of heart, plenty of jokes, and while it tackles some heavy issues, ultimately,
it's about family, and that's what's so powerful about it.
Jackie Brown. Jackie Brown is probably Tarantino's least talked about film, at least in my experience. But that still means it's a Tarantino movie, and he makes pretty good movies. This is a heist movie, but instead of being handled by career criminals, the key player here is the titular Jackie Brown, a flight attendant, an all-around regular person just trying to get by. There's no action set pieces or elaborate chase scenes. It's a lot of sitting down and talking, a Tarantino staple. Even at its climax, the film stays extremely pedestrian, reminding you that Jackie is far from a professional. That's not to say she doesn't have a few tricks up her sleeve, though. It's not often, if ever, where the love interests are in their late 40s or older, but that's exactly what this movie has with Pam Grier and Robert Forster's characters, and I found myself getting really attached to them. Jackie Brown is just as good, if not better, than the other Tarantino films, and deserves to be talked about just as much as some of his more popular works. The Perfection. The Perfection is a psychological horror about musical prodigies. From start to finish, this movie grabbed me in a way few movies ever have. The twists and turns this movie make, it was impossible to look away. As you get completely locked in, the movie will show you some of its most uncomfortable scenes. The two leads of the movie do a fantastic job of getting you almost immediately connected to these characters, which really amps up the dread when the horror elements start coming into play. More than any movie on this list, try not to watch a trailer and go into this film knowing as little as possible for maximum effect. I tentatively recommend this movie. Obviously, if you don't like horror, this is not going to be your thing, but even if you do like horror, some of the scenes and subject matter in this movie are a lot. But if this is something you're willing to take a gamble on, there's a lot here to admire.